In the autumn of 1918, a wave of euphoria swept across the globe. Humanity celebrated a hard-won victory. The Great War, a cataclysmic conflict that had shattered civilization and claimed millions of lives, was finally drawing to a close. Streets in London, Paris, and cities worldwide filled with cheering crowds, their relief echoing through the air. The long nightmare, it seemed, was over. Millions of soldiers began the long-awaited journey home, packed onto transport ships and trains. Their exhaustion was matched only by their elation. The world, bruised and battered, was ready for peace, ready to rebuild, ready to forget the horrors of the trenches. But what they didn't know, what no one could have possibly predicted, was that a silent, invisible enemy had already begun its own global campaign. This new war wasn't fought with artillery and machine guns. It was a biological blitzkrieg that would claim far more lives than the war itself. The origins of this plague are still debated, but many researchers point to the crowded military camps of the American Midwest. In early 1918, in places like Camp Funston, Kansas, a new and aggressive strain of influenza began to surface. It was here, in the perfect incubator of densely packed barracks and constant troop rotation, that the virus found its footing. It then exploited the very infrastructure of war, the global network of troop transports, the railways, the ships, to achieve an unstoppable worldwide reach. Before the armistice was even signed, the pandemic had already begun. This new enemy didn't announce its arrival with a declaration of war. It came in waves, each one different, each one more terrifying. The first wave, which swept across the globe in the spring of 1918, was deceptively mild. It was widespread, yes, but its symptoms were often dismissed as a simple 3-day fever. Many who caught it recovered quickly. It was an inconvenience, not a catastrophe. This false sense of security was the calm before a devastating storm. As the summer of 1918 ended, something sinister was happening on a microscopic level. The virus was mutating as it passed from person to person. Traveling with the troop deployments across Europe and North America, it was evolving into a vastly more lethal version of itself. What emerged in the fall was an enemy more deadly than any weapon forged on the battleground. The second wave, hitting in the autumn of 1918, was the deadliest single disease event in all of human history. It wasn't just its virulence that was shocking, it was who it killed. Pandemics typically prey on the very young and the very old, those with weaker immune systems. But this flu was different. It defied all known patterns. Instead of the typical U-shaped mortality curve, the 1918 flu produced a terrifying W-shaped curve with a massive spike in deaths among young, healthy adults. It became a predator of the strong, targeting those in the prime of their lives. Between the ages of 20 and 40, the very people who had survived the war were now the most vulnerable to the plague that followed. The reason was as paradoxical as it was tragic. Their powerful, robust immune systems didn't fight the virus effectively. They overreacted with catastrophic force. This phenomenon, now known as a cytokine storm, turned the body's own defenses into a weapon of self-destruction. The immune system would unleash a massive, uncontrolled flood of signaling molecules called cytokines into the lungs. This inflammatory onslaught caused immense damage to the surrounding tissue, leading to an aggressive and rapid accumulation of fluid. Essentially, the body's own response caused the lungs to fill up and victims would suffocate. It was a swift, brutal, and horrifying way to die. The speed of the disease was absolutely shocking. A perfectly healthy person could wake up with a mild fever and be dead within 48 or even 24 hours. Patients' skin would turn a dark purplish-blue color from lack of oxygen, a condition called cyanosis, which made it difficult for doctors to even tell a patient's race. Yet, despite the terrifying nature of the pandemic spreading through communities, official news was strangely muted. In the Allied nations like the United States, Britain, and France, wartime censorship was still in full effect. Governments feared that honest reporting on the scale of the disaster would damage public morale and hurt the war effort. Newspapers were forbidden from publishing accounts of the flu's impact. So, while soldiers and civilians were dying in droves, the public was largely kept in the dark. It was a conspiracy of silence, designed to maintain order but ultimately allowing the virus to spread unchecked. Only in neutral Spain, which was not involved in the war and had no wartime censorship, was the press free to report on the unfolding catastrophe. As Spanish newspapers began to detail the grim reality of the pandemic, including the illness of their own King Alfonso XIII, the world took notice. The global outbreak became associated with the one country that was honestly reporting it, leading to the lasting and completely inaccurate nickname, the Spanish flu. As the deadly autumn of 1918 deepened, the truth could no longer be contained. Cities were forced to implement unprecedented measures to try and slow the spread. Social life, as it was known, came to a complete and sudden halt. The lively, bustling streets that had celebrated the war's end just weeks before became eerily empty and silent. Mask mandates became the law in many cities. Citizens were required to wear simple, often homemade, cloth masks whenever they were in public. Spit no more campaigns were everywhere, and public gatherings of any kind were banned. Theaters, dance halls, and saloons were shuttered. Public transportation, if it ran at all, operated under strict restrictions, with conductors sometimes refusing entry to anyone not wearing a mask. Hospitals were overwhelmed almost immediately. They were simply not equipped to handle the sheer volume of critically ill patients. In a desperate attempt to cope, public buildings were hastily converted into emergency wards. Schools, churches, auditoriums, and even armories became massive, sprawling hospitals filled with rows upon rows of cots. The scenes inside were apocalyptic, with exhausted doctors and volunteer nurses working around the clock. But soon, even these desperate measures were not enough. Public services began to collapse entirely as the virus infected the very people needed to keep society functioning. Doctors, nurses, telephone operators, and undertakers fell ill themselves. The infrastructure of death could not keep pace with the virus. There weren't enough morticians to handle the bodies, not enough gravediggers to bury them, and not enough wood to build the coffins. Morgues overflowed and bodies piled up in homes and on street corners. The human tragedy was immeasurable. The flu didn't just kill individuals, it shattered families. Entire households were wiped out in a matter of days. It left behind a generation of orphans and fractured communities struggling to cope with the profound and sudden loss. The social fabric of societies around the world was torn apart. The sheer number of the dead made traditional burials impossible. With a desperate need to dispose of bodies to prevent further spread of disease, cities resorted to digging massive trenches for mass burials. Carts piled high with bodies became a common and harrowing sight. In the face of such overwhelming death, the need for speed overtook the dignity of individual farewells. When the pandemic finally subsided, the final global death toll was staggering. Estimates range from 50 to 100 million people. To put that into perspective, it's more than all the soldiers and civilians killed during World War I and World War II combined. In just over 2 years, the 1918 flu may have killed up to 5% of the world's population, making it perhaps the single largest and fastest loss of life in recorded history. By 1920, the virus had run its course. It mutated again, this time into a much milder, more ordinary form of seasonal flu. At the same time, the global population had built up a degree of collective immunity. The pandemic slowly faded away, not with a bang, but with a whimper. People cautiously began to remove their masks, their smiles weak and uncertain as they stepped back out into the world. Exhausted from years of war and then plague, the world immediately wanted to forget. There was an overwhelming societal need to move past the trauma, to look toward the future and the promise of the Roaring Twenties. The pandemic was a memory too painful to confront, and so it was buried. The magnitude of World War I, with its clear heroes, villains, and epic battles, easily overshadowed the silent, invisible killer. History books focused on the war, and the pandemic became a lost chapter in our collective memory, often relegated to a footnote. For decades it was known as the forgotten pandemic. Today, however, the 1918 flu serves as the most powerful and sobering lesson in our shared history. It's a stark reminder that in our deeply interconnected, globalized world, the greatest threats we face may not come from armies or nations, but from a silent, invisible biological enemy. It underscores the absolute necessity for constant vigilance, robust public health systems, and global cooperation. For the next pandemic is not a question of if, but when. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this history lesson valuable, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more deep dives into the events that shaped our world. Stay curious, and we'll see you in the next one.